It's a surprise to absolutely no one that Tekken 8 is in a horrible state right now. And while it is wishful thinking to think that the developers will fix it all within the next 1 or 2 patches coming up, the reality is the damage they did in Season 2 is so unbelievably bad that this endeavor will probably take years to recover from, if not require an entirely different game, which is something unfortunately I don't think Namco is going to be able to afford. What the developers need is something quick, something easy, and something right now that can be implemented either in the April or May patch. And I actually do have an idea. A small, simple idea that, while risky, could be meta defining and has the potential to buy the developers some time to fix the mistakes they previously made while changing the meta of the game and making it ultimately a better experience for all levels of play. But it is a risky decision, but considering the situation Bandai Namco is in, they might as well try something. What is the suggestion I have? The suggestion I have is make the heat bar once per game. Let me explain. Tekken 8 overall, I'd say, is actually a pretty fun game. And I do believe the heat system is actually a really cool, unique, interesting system. However, it suffers from one simple yet fatal issue that holds it back from being interesting. And it is the sheer fact that it is seen too often. The fact that you are able to use heat every single round, I believe, is the core #1 issue with Tekken 8. Why is this a massive problem? It's for a few reasons. One, it makes heat outright boring. The fact that you will see heat roughly around every 20 to 30 seconds in a game, if not around 3 to 6 times, or pretty much every single round in a Tekken 8 match, you will see heat being activated. The reason this is horrible is because heat is extremely powerful and contains some of the deadliest mix-ups, attacks, and moves in the game. A lot of these moves and attacks have little to no counterplay, and the fact that you see these attacks pretty much every single round makes it an unfun mess where the opponent, or defender in this situation, can basically do absolutely nothing. But this idea of a overpowered version of your character that's buffed up to oblivion and has all these OP attacks isn't a bad idea if the resources were finite. And I believe making the heat bar only used once for the entire match would be the change Tekken 8 needs to make in order for it to be a much better experience. If both players are only able to have one heat bar for an entire match, it makes heat all that much more interesting. And after all, everyone calls Tekken 8 a 50-50 casino royale. So why not make the primary resource of offense a gamble in nature? Why not complement the gamble nature in that regard and make it very risky to go into heat solely for the fact that you can only have one bar of heat for an entire match? And to prove my point, there's actually 2 examples in Tekken 8 that I would like to mention to further prove my point of only having one bar of heat for an entire game. The examples I'll bring up are Leroy and Heihachi. Leroy, of course, has his famous Pimp Cane, which contains a low launching sweep, and of course the mid cane that goes into a full combo, giving Leroy some of his highest damage. Now, if this was to be used every single round, Leroy would not only be 10 times more boring and uninteresting, but he would be a much more broken, brain dead S tier character that you would probably see non-stop tier horde, because moves like low pimp sweep are extremely busted, being a homing, unseeable, unparryable -14 low mid that launches and does around 50 to 70 damage depending on whether you use heat or not, is a very powerful attack and is honestly quite busted. But it becomes 10 times more balanced solely from the fact that it's only used once per match. And while I'm sure you can argue changes for Leroy's pimp sweep, at the same time, no one really talks about anything about Leroy's pimp cane attacks being busted or OP, because you always have the argument it's only used once per game. The same logic can be applied to Heihachi's Ultra Warrior Instinct, where he becomes a super powered up version of himself, doing Tekken 1 hell sweeps with no block stagger, forward forward 2, and a bunch of other crazy shenanigans. But nobody calls this broken or OP because, again, Heihachi has to gamble a lot. He is risking pretty much his most important resource to secure the round. And if he fails in securing the round, well, then he loses an extremely powerful resource. And I firmly believe that this same logic that we see with both Leroy's Pimp Cane and Heihachi's Warrior Instinct should be applied to the global Tekken 8 heat system. Now, because you only have one bar, there is a bit of a interesting situation that I want to address. And unfortunately, I won't be able to answer every question in this video. Hopefully that can be discussed further, but the big question is, if we're only allowed to use one bar of heat, what happens when the round ends where a user uses their heat? For example, let's say you cash out your heat and win the round, but still have half of your heat bar left. Should you be able to keep that remaining heat? There's two answers to this question, both having reasonable arguments in my opinion. The first is, fuck you, you used heat that round, therefore you get no more heat. The other argument is, keep the remaining heat you have. So if you used half your heat to close the round, but still had half remaining after, you just keep that remaining half. Because after all, using a heat burst, for example, uses a massive amount of your heat already. So it's not like you would be using it that much after the fact. I'd say it isn't a problem to keep your heat after a round as long as there's no way to recover heat. Personally, I really think recovering heat is a massive problem, and it could be a serious exploit for keeping heat if you're playing characters like King, for example, who can get their heat back from a successful throw, or a character like Leroy that can spam Wing Chun machine gun punches to get heat back. That is the only issue in terms of keeping heat. So if we can answer this one question of whether you should keep heat or not after using heat in a round, I think we have potential to fix one of the biggest problems with Tekken 8 right now. Now, some of you might be asking, what about heat engagers? Wouldn't that need to be completely revamped? And to that, I say no. For one, there's a ton of problems with heat engagers anyways, and a lot of them need to be reworked regardless. But also, if there is only one bar of heat available for an entire game, that creates a skill expression for resource management. Maybe instead of going for one move that would originally be a heat engager you would spam nonstop, maybe you consider another option if you want to save your resource. I think it would create a very interesting meta for resource management and has a lot of potential for a very unique, interesting style of gameplay that would be seen nowhere else with this one bar per game system. On top of that, I think this one bar per game system also makes it much more clear to the developers what should or shouldn't be a heat engager at the end of the day. Now again, this does not compensate for every single problem with the game. There is just so many to consider, but the vast majority of these problems come down to heat. Heat comes up too much, heat is too powerful, and it should be a smaller, more riskier, and finite resource for everyone. It would also buy the developers a little more time to focus on things like proper balancing, and it would also automatically make defense much more viable because tolerating things like a barrage of heat attacks becomes much more tolerable when you only have to deal with 1 bar of heat versus almost 5 bars of heat when you think about it. That's all I have for this video. Now, I have no idea if anyone's actually going to agree with me on this topic. The entire Tekken community might just call me a total dumbass and shut the fuck up. but you know, I don't see any risk in not giving some food for thought, especially in the horrible state the game is right now. I think it's a really important time to have solutions rather than just complain and crash out altogether. But in the small chance you agree with my really stupid opinion for changing the game, then share it amongst every single person you know so we can let the developers know that this is the needed change they need to make to save Tekken 8. Or at least get them to the point where the game can be recovered and they can spend more time fixing these small details and not worry about the massive uproar the game is dealing with right now. Here's a little secret about the developers, and it's that they really only will change one or two of the biggest things people talk about. For example, with this upcoming patch, Paul and Jack with their unblockable and super broken monkey clap were obviously talked about nonstop, so that is what they changed right away. So they will change what is most talked about the most. So if this becomes the most talked about change that is needed for the game, there is a high chance they will actually do it. Because if there is one thing the developers are, it is that they are afraid of us. Regardless, thank you for even considering my opinion on the matter, as I think all of us can agree we want the absolute best for Tekken at the end of the day. Take care and I'll see you soon.